For a long time, I had, I think it was like 7 years ago, my son got diagnosed with ADHD and got on medication for it and everything. And my community has always memed about me having it and blah, blah, blah. And I think I was the person at the one end of the spectrum where it's like, listen, okay, my brain works. I can sit and I concentrate, blah, blah, blah. I'm just kind of like a lazy piece of shit. I can do this, okay? And my God, it took me, I think it was like 4 or 5 months ago, I had a friend who suggested like, hey, like I have Adderall, you should try some. I was like, oh, fuck it. And for the first time in my life, I was like, holy shit, okay, maybe I actually have ADHD. I'm going to go fucking get a prescription and we'll see, blah, blah, blah. And the past 4 months of my life have been unbelievably different. My entire earlier life. I cannot fucking believe it.
We could go on this Adderall conversation for hours. I had a very similar experience. I've figured out I had ADHD my entire life. It's been in my family.
It was in my family too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because when my son got diagnosed, a very high heritability. And then I started looking back, I was like, oh man, maybe this is why my parents are late to every fucking thing we've ever been.
So late to everything.
Oh my God.
Also, I remember one very distinct memory. I was taking piano lessons and my teacher, rather than fixing your notes, fixing your posture, fixing all of these things to improve your piano playing, he said the number one lesson in all caps, underline, 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 focus.
Yeah.
I just never throughout my entire life.
How do you know if you have ADHD?
Okay, so with most mental illness or most neurodevelopmental things, everybody has some degree of everything. I don't know if you're like on the border. I don't know what to tell you, or I don't know how to help you figure it out. Obviously, you should go to a professional. You can get an assessment. They do a lot of like big neurocognitive testing if you're looking to like really know, or you can just go to a psychiatrist or therapist and get like a less formal assessment where they'll do like a questionnaire. In my opinion, for me, growing up through childhood, there were a lot of very, very, very obvious examples. So like when it came to standardized testing and stuff, like I think we did the ITBS, I think it was Iowa Test of Basic Skills. My scores were always very, very, very high, like 98th, 99th percentile on all of these tests. My ACT scores were very good. I think I got a 35. And my in-class work, my GPA was like 2.7. And that was like in all AP classes. So this was curved up a lot. And my GPA was horrible. I could not focus to do homework to save my fucking life. Okay. I remember I would get math assignments. I would cry because I didn't want to sit and do it. And not because it was hard. It was the idea of like sitting and doing anything ever was just fucking agonizing. It was horrible. And I was the only kid in my entire grade whose parents had to sign my assignment notebook, and the teacher had to sign it to make sure everybody knew what my homework was. Otherwise, I just wouldn't do anything. I would say that I was like exceptionally outside of the norm in a lot of different ways in terms of my ability to focus on things versus, you know, what theoretically should have been like my intellectual capacity to do things. Yeah. So medication for that has just basically made it so that like, I can actually sit and read something for 4 to 6 hours and not hate my life.
To me, that just seems like you weren't challenged in school. Like if you're scoring really high, but you don't want to sit there and do the homework, to me, that's like you just seem bored. I wouldn't think that's
there are
ADHD.
Other indicators too, like hyperactivity is another one. So for example,
Can be.
Well, with ADHD, it's the like random like twitching that you always have. Like if you look at someone's hands and they're always like moving their hands or they're bouncing their knees and stuff like that, that's the hyperactivity. People conflate that with hyperactivity, such as somebody who like runs around everywhere like a golden retriever type personality.
Yeah,
it's actually all of these mini like little twitches that people have in order to like
the reason why I hesitate on the hyperactivity thing, it can come out that way, especially with the twitching and the fidgeting, is ADHD at the end of the day is a disease of focus, and it's how do you direct your attention. For some people, when they can't direct their attention, they become hyperactive because they just want to like run around, especially boys like to run around and do physical things or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's like, can you sit and focus on something that you don't ordinarily have the ability to? Because people with ADHD have a really hard time relating to like reward that's not instantaneous, because there's actually like parts of the brain that are neurodevelopmentally delayed. Like if you autopsy like an ADHD person, there are certain parts in the forward part of the brain that are like, and it's anywhere from like 10 to 13% smaller than an ordinary person. And what that means is for a neurodevelopmentally healthy brain, if you've got to read something for 4 hours, you can sit down and you can do it and you can read it because you know that you have to. For someone with ADHD, it is like an excruciatingly challenging task because unless you're being like constantly rewarded with some stream of stuff, to sit and actually focus on doing anything is like impossible.
That's lack of dopamine.
Yeah. And the paradoxical kind of understanding of this, or the way that it's kind of weird, is that a lot of people say, fuck, I hate these things. I kill people that say shit like this. People say things like, oh, ADHD is a superpower. And so I'm like, bullshit, is not a fucking superpower. That's so stupid. But see, people look at people with ADHD and they'll talk about something called like hyperfocus. all hyperfocus is because ADHD brains are usually so starved for dopamine. If you find something that rewards you regularly, you will sit there and be fucking glued to it because now you have something that's like making you feel like okay for the first time because your brain doesn't ordinarily produce dopamine at the levels it should. That's why a lot of people with ADHD will sit and play. Like for a long time with my kid or for me, I was like, I'm a professional StarCraft 2 player. I play StarCraft 2 for 16 hours a day. How the fuck can I have ADHD? Well, it's because this is like a game and it's rewarding me every single 10 seconds. I'm getting like another fucking hit and it feels good, you know?
So what does Adderall do exactly?
So what an amphetamine is supposed to do is there's two ways that you can basically hit these little neurons, neurotransmitters in your brain. I think one is to prevent dopamine from coming out and one is to like push it and vacuum it back in. I think what amphetamines do is they prevent the reuptake of dopamine. So it increases the amount of dopamine availability in your brain. Methylphenidate, so that would be like Ritalin or Concerta. These things like prevent the stuff from like going out. They basically work the problem from two different ends. But at the end of the day, the goal is just make it so you've got higher levels of dopamine and no epinephrine available in your brain, which like makes you a little bit calmer, a little bit more able to focus on things that ordinarily you wouldn't be able to focus on because you want to go and do something else. And
what was that like for you though? What did it feel like? Like the first time trying it? And then you realize, wait a second, maybe I do have ADHD.
I'll be totally honest, for the first 3 days, I was fucking amphetamine high, okay? I like amphetamines. I think they're fun. I think I've done dextroamphetamine recreationally on accident in the past.
What is
I thought
that?
it was, we'll just say methamphetamine, basically.
Oh.
I thought I was getting
Okay.
MDMA. I was in Amsterdam, but it was a fun time. It was really nice. I was just high for like 20 hours. I didn't know why. And then I've done like MDMA in the past. So there's like, I think there's a euphoria associated with amphetamine. So the first 3 days, I was trying this Adderall XR. I was definitely just high. I could definitely feel how I was like.
What was the dosage?
I started, because my friend was on 20 milligrams of Adderall XR, which is probably high to start with. But yeah, for the first 3 days, I was like fucking high. I was like, this is cool, but like, I know I'm just high. After day 3 and 4, when the euphoria wore off, what I noticed was that like I could be on my computer and I could just read stuff. And I was like interested. I didn't have to keep rereading the same fucking sentence over and over again. And I could just sit and read and absorb the information and understand it, talk about it for hours and hours and hours without having to feel like I was being like sucked to my other screen, that I had to like have so for instance, like if you guys are watching my stream, I'm always like playing games and stuff. I haven't played a video game, I think in like 4 months because I just don't have the drive where it's like, I need like something that's like making me feel good all the time. I can just sit and read and focus on stuff, which is so fucking nice. Yeah.
This is you're gonna hate this, Graham, but this is the first time I've ever said this to you. I recognized recently, so I review every podcast before it goes out. We have editors, and then I kind of do the final comb over. Recently, what I've been doing, because it takes me hours to go through a 2-hour podcast at 2x speed, because I just pause it, rewatch, do this and that. I just can't focus. But if I play a video game while I'm reviewing it, I can get through it so much faster. Similar to exactly what you do when you're researching, doing the super, super high level, deep research at the same time of playing a video game. For some reason,
I used to, but now I don't anymore. I don't need to now that I'm like medicated for the past 4 months. I don't need to have that video game in the background. Yeah.
So I have Adderall prescribed, but I take it very sparingly.
Oh,
like I have a sporadic schedule because I talked to my psychiatrist and he was like, ideally you don't use it every single day, which is always how I was caught up on it. I thought that once you're prescribed, you take it as every single day to supplement you basically. But actually what it is to make up. Like if you get a really bad night of sleep and the next day you need to perform for some job or something like that, you take it to bring you back up effectively.
Oh, that's crazy. I completely disagree on every single part of that. This
is something that we should probably talk about outside of the podcast because I think we're getting pretty nuanced here on Adderall. Okay. But this is something, since I was like 19, I've like had it. I quit cold turkey for 3 years, not taking it at all. Realized my life was like way worse when I wasn't taking it, period. Now I'm kind of like using it sparingly, but that's another conversation.
It works for you, yeah.
Yeah.
Fuck. I wish I could remember. You had Derek, I think, on from More Plays, More Days, and he was saying shit. I was getting super fucking triggered, but I think it's just really hard to tell like who actually has problems versus who's just like kind of lazy. I think that's
the way I look at it is how long have you had this issue? Have you had it your whole life?
No, why does it seem so much more common now? You see these things, it's like ADHD is going up through the roof and it's overprescribed. Do you think it's because we're testing for this now and we could acknowledge what it is? Or do you think that people are misdiagnosed all the time?
It's probably overprescribed and underprescribed at the same time, I think. It probably just depends on the person. I think it's like 4 or 5% of people have an ADHD diagnosis. People think today that it's like 50 to 60%. It's not that high. Like people think it's way higher than it actually is. But yeah, I don't know. I'm uncomfortable venturing into that.
Dr. K answered this question.
Did he?
Yes, he said that a lot of people, and the same thing goes for actually autism these days, but a lot of it is actually just autism by proxy, and the same thing is ADHD by proxy. Because if you look at the way that we're actually spending our time, it's just scrolling on TikTok or scrolling on Instagram Reels and stuff like that, and that lowers our dopamine.
I would fight to the death on this as well. There's absolutely no research that connects ADHD to environmental factors like scrolling on screens or anything like that.
This is what Dr. K said.
Yeah. Here's the thing. Anecdotally, I think there's definitely a correlation between TikTok scrolling and attention spans.
It increases people's like standard for like entertainment value threshold at any given moment because they're so used to super high entertainment value, and then it decreases the like basically everything else and makes it monotonous.
Like, what would you say to like a 3-year-old kid or like a 2-year-old who's getting used to just like swiping, and just scrolling? It's like
it can happen. I'm saying there's no research that connects any amount
probably
of like
because it's so new.
But there's so many. The thing is, there's so many distractions these days, and I think that's what, because people aren't productive because you have advertisements, commercials, Instagram, all of these things.
And there might be those distractions, but it doesn't change the actual composition of your brain, your ability
which
to create.
is ADHD by proxy, because people find themselves unproductive since they're constantly being distracted by all these different things.
Sure, but the research on this is scarce because I think it's hard to do this, but there's one study that I was familiar with where if you give amphetamines to people, what they did was I think they broke people into 3 or 4 groups. If you give amphetamines to people who don't have ADHD and then you assign them work, people that you give amphetamines to will do more work, but they're not more productive. The quality of the work actually suffers. And the funny thing between this particular study was I think it broke them into 4 groups. The people that did the best when they were given the placebo, meaning no amphetamines, and then you did their work, and then when you gave them amphetamines, their performance was degraded. They became the worst performers afterwards, even though they didn't feel that way. They actually felt like they were performing even better, probably because they were high on amphetamines and it feels good. But when you track the quality of the work, it decreased. So the idea that like if you just give amphetamines to everybody will like become better, I don't think is actually empirically tested anywhere. As much as it feels very counterintuitive.
And I'm not a proponent of that, just to clarify.
It seems like what you would need to do is take 2 kids, 2 twins, put one of them on TikTok and one of them on a book, and then test attention spans after like 5 years and see who has a higher. Yeah. But it just, even for myself, I find myself falling into the trap at 33. If I scroll TikTok or Instagram Reels for too long, for too many days in a row, I find myself, it's harder to focus that following week after. Like there's a cool down period where I have to like,
I understand what you're saying. And I don't necessarily disagree. This is just, I just have to put this out there for my fellow strugglers, okay? Because it took me until I was 34 years old to finally get medication to do this, because I would fall into the trap of saying like, I'm probably just lazy. I play too many video games. I do this and blah, 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 blah. But one thing that happens growing up, and I don't know if you felt this way, is when you complain about a certain thing, everybody will kind of agree, but they don't actually do that particular thing. It's like a virtue signal. So I would say that when I was in high school, easily, I think I probably studied for 10 hours cumulatively through the entire 4 years I was in high school. That might be an overshot. I could never sit down and study. But when you talk to other kids, like, oh, like, did you study for the test or blah, blah, blah? People are like, oh, no, like I couldn't, blah, blah, blah. When a normal kid says, like, oh, no, I don't think I could really study, what they mean is they studied for like an hour Friday, 2 hours Saturday, and like only an hour Sunday. That's what they meant when they would say that. Because we would get tests back and I'd be like, oh, I got like a 73 on my calc fucking paper, and the kid next to me who didn't study and couldn't bring himself got like a 94, and I'm like, fuck, how'd you do this? It's like, oh man, I think the last thing on Sunday, like it just helped. And I was like, what do you mean the last? How many fucking days did you study for this for, right? So there are definitely people that are just lazy or that complain or just want like a drug to fix things. I understand that. But I think there are a group of people that have ADHD, hopefully, who your brain is just, it's really, 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 really hard to stay focused on things. Holy shit. And the problem is that if we are to believe the current state of ADHD research, and if we are to believe that the researchers know what they're talking about, if you have that type of brain, you cannot ever, 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 ever self-motivate. It is impossible. You don't have the neurochemical composition or the developmental structures that are grown enough to do it. The only way to do it is to externalize all of the rewards. So like a counterintuitive example, for a kid that has ADHD, you might think that like, okay, well, I know he's got ADHD. I'm going to be more patient with him so that he can do, his work in a timely manner. That's the opposite of what you're supposed to do. You have to actually ride that kid harder. You have to be like, hey, do this, do this, do this, do this. Because when you constantly remind him, that's the only way that they actually get it done, because they can't internalize the like, okay, I know this sucks, but like it'll just take 3 hours and I'll be done with it and that'll be fine. It is impossible for a person with ADHD at a certain level to be able to do that ever. Yeah. So, okay, I'm done with my spiel. Fuck, I'm sorry.
That's great. I want to keep talking about that. We'll talk more
me
about
too.
it
Okay,
afterwards
me
because
too.
this
Gotcha.
is that'd be a great conversation.
I last 5 seconds. The only other reason I bring that last thing too is because amphetamines are a really awesome mind drug. And that like when you take people with depression and you give them like SSRIs, bro, that's a whole fucking like 1 month period of like titrating up in doses and you don't even know it's gonna fucking work and you might want to fucking kill yourself and blah blah blah. Whereas if you have ADHD and you get like an amphetamine, you'll know the next day or 3 days like if it's good or bad. There's not this ramp up and ramp down and like, oh, I just got off my ADHD meds, so I'm gonna be like for a month. Like, yeah, that's my last spell. Okay. If you have ADHD, go get tested.